convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
All the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
All right. It is Friday, November 22nd, 2024, the 1,402nd day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Welcome, everyone, to another live stream in place of the normal show. We'll be doing this for a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll be doing it more in the future than we've done it in the past, but it's not going to be an everyday kind of thing. So yesterday we talked about Matt Gaetz. We talked about Donald Trump off in his secret evil lair down in Mar-a-Lago, plotting evil and revenge with all of his, what do you call them, henchmen, his evil cohorts in his lair. He's figuring out how not to do a transition to totally cut the illegitimate government, the administrative state, that false reality layer of our government off from all information about what he's doing, what the incoming administration is doing. And at the same time, we're playing constant fantasy sports, seeing who Donald Trump's fantasy team will be for the term following Donald Trump's third straight presidential election victory. So Matt Gaetz dropped out yesterday. He decided he is not going to be our fantasy running back for this season. Injured or something, going on the injured reserve list. Maybe we'll be able to pick him up off the free agent wire around week 8 or week 9. But right now, he's just not going to be on the fantasy team. He spoke to one Charlie Kirk and gave us the update. This is Matt Gaetz in his Clark Kent attire.
I now have to ask about just what your plans are, and it's okay if you have to, punt on it because you might not know. It's important to know you resigned from this Congress, not the next Congress. Our audience is 100% behind Matt Gaetz, by the way. They are very, very upset that you were not able to get all the way to Attorney General. I have to ask, what is next for Matt Gaetz?
I'm still going to be in the fight, but it's going to be from a new perch. I do not intend to join the 119th Congress. There are a number of fantastic Floridians who've stepped up to run for my seat, people who have inspired with their heroism, with their public service. And I'm actually excited to see Northwest Florida go to new heights and have great representation. Charlie, I've been in an elected office for 14 years. I first got elected to the state house when I was 26 years old, and I'm 42 now. And I've got some other goals in life that I'm eager to pursue with my wife and my family. And so I'm going to be fighting for President Trump. I'm going to be doing whatever he asks of me, as I always have. But I think that 8 years is probably enough time in the United States Congress. You know, in Florida, our voters got to vote on term limits for state government, and the campaign was 8 is enough. And so you can only do 8 years in the Florida House of Representatives. And so it seems like a pretty poetic time to allow that great new blood to come in, to allow my district to have high quality representation. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not taking off for a tropical excursion for the rest of my life. I am here to help save this country. And one thing the great patriots at Turning Point know, we need people at every level. We need brilliant lawyers on the outside. We need tough congressmen and congresswomen on the inside. We need a leadership structure under President Trump that's going to allow for durability of our movement and the ability to continue this great realignment of our politics. And so I'll play a part in that. I plan to be a big voice, but maybe not as an elected member of the government.
Okay, so Matt Gaetz has already resigned from his current congressional position, and he was named as the nominee for AG. He withdrew his name from consideration for that position, even after J.D. Vance had walked him through the Senate, introducing him to all the senators who apparently had never heard of Matt Gaetz before. And maybe that didn't go as planned, whatever. Matt Gaetz withdraws his name. He is also announcing that he will not be a congressman in the incoming Congress. And part of the justification he just gave was that 8 years is the length of time you can serve in the Florida legislature. And he thought that it would be appropriate as a Florida congressman to limit his time in Congress to 8 years as well. It's strange that he did not think of that prior to having just been reelected a few weeks ago. If indeed we had an election a few weeks ago, and I would contend that we did not. But Gaetz now stepping back, they're going to have a special election, presumably they're in Florida, to elect a new congressman to fill Matt Gaetz' seat in a different election. And hey, maybe Florida will do something that can produce legitimate representatives in government. I kind of doubt that. And I doubt that they're going to let anybody check to make sure. But we'll see how that progresses. Matt Gaetz is not going to be doing that. Will he be appointed as the Florida senator? I guess we'll find out. Is there another role he might serve in a Trump administration? Maybe that'll happen down the line. Maybe the whole thing was one of those ops where you just float the person's name out there, let everyone react, and then pick up the pieces, having known exactly what plays the enemy was going to run, seeing what they have against Matt Gaetz. It's also possible, I said this on Badlands Daily this morning, it's possible that some of this blackmail on a few of these characters is just getting burned up. You can really only use it once, and then it stops working after that. If it fails the first time, if there's not proof to substantiate the allegations, and the public moves on, as they have with these Matt Gaetz complaints over years now, it's not going to work again. And the idea that that was what drove Gaetz to withdraw his name, that makes no sense to me. And there are people out there in the normie sphere saying that it's, of course, irresponsible for us to talk about how all of this was scripted or planned in advance. The idea that Donald Trump is coming into this with no knowledge of what's going to happen and how the nomination process will go down and where his leverage points are and the rest of it, and that he put Matt Gaetz out there and it just failed. His first thing out of the gates has failed. I don't buy that for a second. I think it is a ridiculous notion. And, you know, there's these people who think it's really important to hew to the central narrative, because who might even understand it to be a narrative op on some level, but they still think that the narrative op is so important that they must support it, even in all its dishonesty. Like, it's not somehow acceptable to push things forward or point out how certain things said are clearly not true. We just saw one right there. If Matt Gaetz is saying that he doesn't believe in a principled fashion that a congressman in Florida should serve more than 8 years, since they can't do that in the Florida legislature, he shouldn't have run for re-election, right? It's not like this is the first time he ever thought of that. So there's clearly something else going on there. And I get he's telling the story and he's playing his role, and we can say, yes, sure, that's fine, that's good. I like Matt Gaetz, as I've said. I'm the person who used to hashtag Gaetz 2028 on Twitter. He used to follow me. I'm a Matt Gaetz fan. That said, I mean, that's not the reason why he's not going to maintain or go through the nomination process and the confirmation process as Attorney General. And I can't imagine that it's because of some allegations that have been that have come to nothing. And there's every reason to believe that they were made up out of whole cloth by a criminal. So Donald Trump yesterday, following the Gaetz announcement, a few hours later, 6 hours later, says on Truth Social, I am proud to announce former Attorney General of the great state of Florida, Pam Bondi, as our next Attorney General of the United States. Pam was a prosecutor for nearly 20 years, where she was very tough on violent criminals and made the streets safe for Florida families. Then, as Florida's first female Attorney General, she worked to stop the trafficking of deadly drugs and reduce the tragedy of fentanyl overdose deaths, which have destroyed many families across our country. She did such an incredible job that I asked her to serve on our Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission during my first term. We saved many lives. For too long, the partisan Department of Justice has been weaponized against me and other Republicans. Not anymore. Pam will refocus the DOJ to its intended purpose of fighting crime and making America safe again. I've known Pam for many years. She is smart and tough and is an America First fighter who will do a terrific job as Attorney General. And she may well do that. Like Matt Gaetz, she is also an election denier, as she must be in order to take any of these positions. You can't go in to a role in the Trump administration if you are pretending that elections are real. And that should be a qualification. It also presents a problem for all of these people, because they should be contesting all elections right now. And so should Donald Trump. I understand that there's some other plan at play, but we all still should expect and demand that he actually follow through on that, because otherwise a grave mistake has been made. That is part of the deal. We can't just continue to have these fake elections because Donald Trump has won one, and we've been told that the red team has won a lot of elections. Now we're just supposed to be happy about that forever. Donald Trump's got to go after the fake and fraudulent elections that we have in this country. That is absolutely part of the deal. My pal, Pepe Lives Matter, who goes by Ultra Frog on Twitter, on X, formerly Twitter, posted a bit of a thread yesterday. This is some info on Pam Bondi. He goes through how she expertly laid out how Joe and Hunter Biden were using a Ukraine energy company as a money laundering pay-for-play scheme while Joe was vice president. And that he had Hunter Biden help siphon money out of the CCP while in China. Joe Biden was the point man. And he goes through a number of claims that Pam Bondi has been all over. Pam Bondi was I'm not sure what this video is. Pam Bondi was, or maybe this is her talking through this right now. Let's go ahead and listen to a couple minutes of this Pam Bondi video. But she was also involved in the...
We were told to look at Joe Biden as the model of integrity. But when you look at his 47-year career in politics, the people who benefited are his family members, not the American people. Let's take a closer look. We all know about Joe's son, Hunter Biden. A corrupt Ukrainian oligarch put Hunter on the board of his gas company, even though he had no experience in Ukraine or in the energy sector. None. Yet he was paid millions to do nothing. He only had one qualification that mattered. He was the son of the man in charge of distributing U.S. aid to Ukraine. And recently reported information revealed that a few months after Hunter Biden joined that corrupt company's board, the Obama-Biden State Department began doing business with them, even when it remained under investigation for corruption.
That was Pam Bondi speaking at the COVID era Donald Trump Republican National Convention. Of course, those were rather subdued affairs. You remember they were speaking in an auditorium to no audience, and it was essentially just a series of 5-minute long speeches about, you know, whatever political priorities each one of the speakers had. And there was really a pretty awful lineup of speakers. You remember people like Dan Crenshaw being involved, a lot of people who we saw go anti-Trump over the last 4 years or bail out completely on Donald Trump when he needed people the most, you know, in terms of, you know, kind of in the story world. Kind of ridiculous show that year. Here's Pam Bondi talking about the fakeness of our elections.
Why Democrats say voter ID, photo ID is racist. Why is it racist? I mean, the polls show practically the whole country is in favor of it, including, I might add, African Americans and other minority groups. Europe does it. Why is this racist? And why shouldn't we have photo IDs?
And, you know, Larry, that should be an insult to all the African Americans when they compare that to Jim Crow laws. They're comparing voter ID to Jim Crow laws where African Americans weren't allowed in restaurants, bars, buses, neighborhoods, and they were subject to suffering and death. So to even compare it to that, I think is a horrible thing to do. And so in Florida, of course, we have great laws and you have to show your ID. How in the world is that racist when to buy alcohol you have to show your ID? To get on an airplane you have to show your ID. I went to the hockey game last night, and if I was going to will call to pick up a ticket, I would have to show my ID.
Very based and red-pilled take. There is... Hold on for processing, and we'll get one of the election-oriented videos from Pam Bondi up. She was, you know, there are some people who have some issues with the Pam Bondi nomination. You just got to let these things play out. In my mind, there's no point in getting upset at these things. We can simply vet them, put the information out there, put our positions out there. If other people agree, then the critique, the criticism, the questions about her past or her positions will seed their way through the public conversation, and hopefully we'll get some answers. The public should be vetting all of these things. Donald Trump might actually want the public to be vetting all of these things in an open source kind of way. And, you know, this is how our information flow works. The community puts the information together. I hate the word community, but it's whatever. I'll have to figure out a new word to use instead of community. But, you know, the MAGA community, the truth community, whatever it is, Q people, all put the information out there. Other people see it. You share the information. If more people think that that information is important, it'll reach a certain point. It begins to receive attention from bigger and bigger accounts as it goes on. And eventually it hits a critical mass in public where that piece of information must be reckoned with. It's okay for us to put those things out there about Donald Trump's nominations. Donald Trump, as I talked about this on Badlands Daily as well, Donald Trump has far more information than we have, and we should consider that at all times. He's the catalyst of the awakening. He's the leader of the MAGA movement. He has been a catalyst of a worldwide discovery of truth for the last 9 years. So we can give him the benefit of the doubt. We can understand that he is way ahead of us in terms of the information at his disposal, and he is way ahead of us on an informational timeline. We're going to figure out things later into the future that he knows and is acting on right now, and we're not going to be privy to that information during this current decision-making process, most likely, unless that information gets out there, and it can filter its way through the public. But we can give him the benefit of the doubt for all those reasons and assume that he's doing the right things for the right reasons. And we can still be critical of those picks. And he might actually want us to do that, because if he is the tribune of the people and he is the tool that the people use to destroy the deep state, he's going to want the people's input on that. And I believe that if any of this plan that's happening behind the scenes, if that's going to be moral in some way, because it involves so much deception, you would have to know that the people are on board the entire time. And I believe that they are monitoring those things. So it's important that the feedback is not just one direction from Trump and the administration out toward the American people, but that's a conversation that is ongoing. Here's Pam Bondi once again.
Things your reporter said, we do have evidence of cheating, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we are still on the ground in Pennsylvania. I'm here right now, and we are not going anywhere until they declare that we won Pennsylvania. We're watching this. So you see they're trying to suppress us from coming in even the convention center where the ballots are being counted. So yes, we have intervened in the case involving Bukhar. She is the Secretary of State. The law makes it very clear in the U.S. Constitution that the legislature, they are the ones who determine the time, place, and manner of votes. Not her. She's come in and tried to change the rules of the game. She's a member of the executive branch, and that is not her job. So we're going back in the U.S. Supreme Court there. The case that we filed that will be being heard momentarily this morning, Ainsley, is one in state court. We have appealed that. What I saw on the ground yesterday should not happen to any candidate, Democrat nor Republican, in this country. You are allowed to observe the process when your votes are being counted. You have there, and we followed all the rules. You're allowed 15 people in, only residents of Pennsylvania, all these strict criteria. We have our people ready to go. It's not a mob of people. We were with all our people last night, 15 people, well-educated, prepared on the issues. All they want to do is observe the vote counting process. Because as you know, a lot of these ballots came in late, they were stamped, and we just want to see that they were stamped properly. Right. So what they've done, they put up, it looks like a police barricade all around the convention center. They let them in the room, but they can't observe anything. For every vote that came in late, that was postmarked late, that
November 4th?
discounts after November 4th. On November 4th. That discounts, on November 4th, that discounts every legal vote that came in.
Yep.
So that means all the good residents who are all supporting us in Pennsylvania, their votes don't count by these fake ballots that are coming in late.
So Pam Bondi knows, of course, that Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. Another good thing. We will just have to see how that nomination proceeds. We'll start getting into some of that vetting process, I imagine, as it goes on. Will she be attacked as much as Matt Gaetz was? That is very, very unlikely, because at least so far, it doesn't seem like they have a scandal to drop on Pam Bondi. And if they keep going through with these scandals, I mean, maybe this is what Trump is doing, burning out all the blackmail, and then he's going to use these people later. Same with, the same that is true of Gaetz, may be true of Pete Hegseth, who seems to be facing his own kind of ridiculous sexual assault allegation. You got to wonder why, if these allegations are serious and these really are bad men who have done bad things, why they aren't taken more seriously until it is time to ruin their reputations as they take on a new role. As far as someone like Pam Bondi goes, you got to wonder how involved she's been over the last 4 years and at what level. She's been involved with America First Legal. So she's been very close to Donald Trump and whatever Donald Trump is doing at the 45 office at the Winter White House, also known now as his evil lair at Mar-a-Lago. She seems like a perfect choice for Attorney General. She also seems like she might have been working in some sort of similar role to that over the last 4 years. And maybe we'll find out all sorts of interesting facts about Pam Bondi in the future. There are elements of the left who are rerunning the old competency is even more dangerous argument. This is how they used to say that Ted Cruz is even more dangerous than Donald Trump because he's competent, not like Donald Trump, who's crazy.
Pam Bondi is exactly what I was saying in the last segment that we should all fear because she's competent. We may not agree with her ideologically, but she actually knows how to do this job. So if anyone on the Democratic side or anyone who cared about liberty or justice was thinking, well, maybe Matt Gaetz will screw this up and that'll give us some time. No, Pam Bondi knows what she's doing. She knows what she's doing about immigration. Remember, Florida is one of those states that's been very aggressive about migrants and deportation and moving people to different states and everything else like that. Florida has enacted all sorts of rules and laws to curtail students and what they can do on campuses and finding legal justifications for manipulating education money. She is a dangerous and effective pick, and that's frankly worse than what we would have got with Matt Gaetz, even with the deplorable moral background that he has.
Yeah, and I want to discuss that with a little more depth with both of you, including her record on civil rights, LGBTQ rights, and other issues that are front and center at the DOJ, and which we know were also big campaign issues this cycle.
Blah, blah, blah. Poor MSNBC. Apparently, they are not long for this world. I heard Rachel Maddow is going to be giving up part of her salary, like $5 million of her salary. I don't know if this is worth it. Now I bring it up. I have to back it up. We're being told that MSNBC is shedding viewers. Okay, Rachel Maddow is not giving up her MSNBC salary, but she has agreed to a significant pay cut. She will now earn $25 million annually, reduced from her previous $30 million salary as part of a new 5-year contract. Rachel Maddow makes $500,000 a week. Rachel Maddow makes as much as like NBA superstars. And I mean, not that NBA superstars are deserving of that sort of money, but they are actually in the top 1% of the 1% in terms of their particular talent in their field. They have accomplished things that are almost impossible to accomplish, and they generate an extraordinary amount of money for their organizations. So there is some justification there. Rachel Maddow talks to maybe 2 or 3 times more people in an audience than Badlands Media does. And we don't all collectively make even a fraction of what Rachel Maddow makes. So I don't know how you can justify her income on that basis, but hey, I guess you are earning whatever you are able to get. And if Rachel Maddow can get it, who's to say that she shouldn't be able to have it? Not me, that's for sure. Rachel Maddow, on the other hand, is the sort of person who would say that she shouldn't be able to get it, except not when it comes to her. Wealth, equality, income equality for thee, but not for me. That's Rachel Maddow. Oh yeah, the MSNBC thing though, it's going to be interesting because, you know, we've talked a bunch about kind of the fairness doctrine and equal time. Did an episode about that back before the ridiculous Trump-Biden debate in, what was that, June, the end of June? So silly. A debate in the end of June before either candidate is actually nominated by their party. Such a fake election, and everybody's just playing right along. Anyhow, we saw the conversations about CBS, Donald Trump threatening their broadcasting license because of the way that they were editing interviews in a politically biased way meant to accomplish political goals, and potentially violating federal regulations of the broadcast television industry while doing that for these networks. NBC is the same sort of network. And maybe the idea is that you can't just spin off an MSNBC and allow that spin-off organization to do what you as a federally regulated broadcast network is not able to do. In principle, that makes total sense to me. We will see if that is the case, but I don't think it's just that they're shedding viewers. I don't think that's what the, I don't know what you would call it, the realignment, reconstruction of these organizations would be. Are they being seized in some way under one of the executive orders? Is this some form of drainage? Are they going to have to be seized and then privatized, the parts sold off? I was going to spend some time on, and maybe we should just do it now because I think it's probably going to be important. So Google this week announced, or it was announced this week, that Google would be spinning off the Chrome browser. And this is funny, actually. So this is NPR. The Justice Department is trying to make Google sell off its Chrome browser. 2 days ago, this is Wednesday, November 20th. Justice lawyers late Wednesday night asked the federal judge overseeing an historic antitrust case against Google to order the tech giant to sell off its popular Chrome browser, something that could dramatically shake up the world of online search. Those aren't the same thing. The agency is also asking that Google stop making third-party payments to phone makers like Apple that ensure its default search position. That is going to be a different thing. That might shake up the market for search engines. Although we're moving into an AI search engine model, these sorts of search engines are already operating on AI to some extent. Google's artificial intelligence technology, sorry, I bit the hell out of my tongue last night, is also targeted by the Justice Department's proposals. In its filing, the government asks the judge to allow websites to opt out of having data trained by its data-guzzling AI models. And finally, justice attorneys are asked, whoa, where did my, sorry. Apparently I just clicked on the case file. Justice attorneys are asking that Google either divest from its Android phone business or have the court supervise its Android division to police any possible instances of Google using Android to kneecap competitors. The playing field is not level because of Google's conduct, and Google's quality reflects the ill-gotten gains of an advantage illegally acquired, the Justice Department wrote in a final judgment. Well, that's pretty hardcore. So they're going to spin off the Chrome browser. This will split the company's browser from its search engine and create more competition in the online search market, they claim. Now, I've been using Brave for the last 4 years. It is basically a Chrome clone, and I think that there are some others as well. We've talked before about the good twin, evil twin versions of some of these technology apps. And all of them are DARPA technology, it seems, at least on some level, from conception. And they have these parallels around the world. Facebook has a parallel in Russia called VK that was started by Pavel Durov and his brother, the guys who started Telegram. Turns out that Telegram has a parallel in Facebook's app, WhatsApp. So Facebook and WhatsApp under the Zuckerberg thing, Telegram and VK under the Durovs. You have Snapchat. You have something almost just like Snapchat, which is TikTok, and that was Chinese. And now TikTok is being divested from ByteDance, at least in the US. Google is going to divest and spin off Chrome. Did it already happen? Because in 2020, we were told that Donald Trump was having ByteDance divest TikTok. Otherwise, they were going to be removed from the App Store. The courts supposedly struck that down, and then the Congress brought it back like 9 months ago. So the same thing is going to happen. The same thing that Trump said was going to happen, that was supposed to happen 4 years ago, is now going to happen in January of next year. So there was a pause, and then the exact same thing is happening. And there's been a story. The court stopped it. The Congress brought it back. Without the story and without our perception of that pause, it's just the same thing being completed. So we have these spin-off Chrome clones that people have been using. Do we need Chrome itself spun off? And then we had Chris Pavlovsky of Rumble suggest that he is interested in buying, let's get off that link, in buying the Chrome browser. Could Chrome be ready to rumble? This is the headline in The Verge. What an odd looking website. Look at this. It's like well, this sucks. But at least it has Pavlovsky's tweet. He is quote tweeting Reuters Business. They say the U.S. Department of Justice will ask a judge to force Google to sell off its Chrome internet browser. Bloomberg News reports, citing people familiar with the plans. Pavlovsky says, hi, Google, to save you headaches and years more of court battles, Rumble is very interested in acquiring Google Chrome. Well, that's great. Good luck to them. I hope they're able to do that. Now, Rumble has the Rumble Cloud, which could potentially be a parallel to the Amazon Web Services sort of thing. They were the middleman, that point in the chain where the data could be cut off and apps themselves could be cut off, like Parler was, and then removed from the App Store and the rest of those manipulations. We have all of these parallels to these legacy big tech platforms that supposedly are going to be part of our new information infrastructure and supposedly actually reflect values of free speech and want to protect free speech. So far, so good. We'll see in the future. This stuff, we talked about this a bit at GARP. This stuff is always kind of scary and intimidating for people because you switch from one thing, the devil you know, to potentially the devil you don't know. And that thing is supposed to be your savior. If only everybody goes over to that thing. I get why people are worried. The devil we do know is very, very bad. So I've been happy to switch to the new platforms and try to help support that parallel infrastructure being built out. Now, I don't know if it's ultimately going to be the right solution, and maybe it's not for everybody, but I certainly appreciate it more than being banned on Instagram and being banned on Twitter, and knowing that all of these sites are stealing all of my information and probably using it directly to exploit me in conjunction with that global regime. I mean, if I'm going to be tracked by one party or another, I'm going to prefer being tracked by at least people who seem to be aligned with Donald Trump right now. I'll take my chances with them rather than staying with the people who I'm certain censored me. I don't know. It's a tough one. You have to like headlines like this one. in the extremely commie outlet that used to be an elite literature magazine. Now it's just a rag of communist propaganda. The Atlantic, owned by Steve Jobs' widow, Lorraine Powell, who is apparently friends with Ghislaine Maxwell. So the case against spinning off Chrome. This is from this morning, actually. Let's see if we can forget it. I don't want to read Atlantic articles generally. It's just that the headline cracked me up. We don't need to spend more time on that. But I think we can see the form of this new parallel tech infrastructure being built out. And I think it's pretty exciting, to be honest. Today is Friday, so let's get into some serious panic from the regime, and where will we start? Let's start here. Oh, wait a second. Here we are. Let's go to this. Over on X, formerly Twitter. This is from my pal. The storm has arrived 17.
In the case of the Department of Justice, if there are orders to troops,
the Department of Defense,
to shoot in case of a protest or a gathering in a church basement or any kind of meeting, there is no restraint of the same kind. And so what this kind of threat represents is something profoundly dangerous to our democracy. And that's why I have actually proposed a measure that would constrain the Insurrection Act, which is the legal basis for the president to order this kind of military intervention on American soil. And remember, we use the military to defend our nation. We do not use it against our own citizens on American soil. And that's the basis of our constitutional principle and also the Insurrection Act. Unfortunately, the Insurrection Act is so broad that he could misinterpret it. It's not just about Donald Trump. It's a weakness in our present law. It could be misused by an independent or a Democrat in that same office. We ought to move to correct it. But right now, we can see the fire on the horizon, and we ought to do something about it, because I think our Republican colleagues ultimately will be judged harshly by history if we fail to do so. And so I think this concern about the misuse of the military also deeply concerns our military.
Yes. Richard Blumenthal, communist, is deeply concerned about the deep concerns of our military. And wait a second, I believe that Richard Blumenthal, let me just finish this search before I say this. Yes. Richard Blumenthal, I'm always happy when my memory serves me well. Richard Blumenthal is a guy who's got stolen valor issues. This is from Fox back in 2010. Blumenthal apologizes for inaccurate claims about Vietnam service. So an interesting person to be interested in the deep concerns of the military. Now, he's talking about the Insurrection Act. We did an episode on DPH a few months back about a ridiculous documentary movie called War Game, where they kind of play acted a cabinet meeting or a situation room meeting about whether or not the fake Democrat president was going to institute the Insurrection Act to put down what was essentially portrayed as Michael Flynn and the QAnons and the Oath Keepers after a contested election between a Democrat president and a very bad Republican president like Donald J. Trump. So I'm glad the conversation's out there. Always glad the conversation's out there. The suggestion that somehow Donald Trump is going to abuse the Insurrection Act is a little silly. But would Joe Biden? I mean, Joe Biden's not a real president. I'm talking about in a story sense, will we be told by the television that Joe Biden's going to use the Insurrection Act and institute martial law after we have some sort of false flag event or whatever. But hey, it could be Donald Trump as well. Let's just go to the Insurrection Act on Wikipedia briefly here. The Insurrection Act of 1807 is a U.S. federal law that empowers the president to deploy the military and federalized National Guard troops within the U.S. in particular circumstances, such as to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion. The act provides a statutory exception to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which limits the use of military personnel under federal command for law enforcement purposes within the United States. Before invoking the powers under the Act, 10 U.S. Code Section 254 requires the president to publish a proclamation ordering the insurgents to disperse. As part of the Posse Comitatus Act, these provisions have since been amended. And you will recall that on January 6th of 2021, Donald Trump issued exactly that proclamation by video on Twitter, when it was just Twitter, not even formally Twitter, to the entire American public. That is an official presidential statement as determined by the courts. And Donald Trump issued that statement asking anyone causing problems, breaking the law, involved in even the protest, to disperse and go home in peace, respecting law enforcement. He did everything required in that act. And people pretend that that didn't happen because, Donald Trump isn't a serious president, according to the television. There are exceptions rooted in the president's own constitutional authority. Defense Department guidelines describe homeland defense and as a constitutional exception to Posse Comitatus restrictions, meaning that measures necessary to protect national security from external threats are not subject to the same limitations. Perplexity notes that the act was modified in 1861 to address the issue of secession during the Civil War. This modification allowed the federal government to use the National Guard and armed forces against the will of state governments in cases of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. So the federal government could essentially commandeer the National Guard of the states and use them for the purposes of the federal government. So this is during this Civil War. And we've talked before about how that period and in the Reconstruction, that was, at least according to George Fletcher, Columbia University Law School professor, the point at which the Constitution was overthrown and overturned and inverted. And so at that point, they wanted the military, the federal government wanted to be able to use the military to stop an insurrection. And we were told that Donald Trump would not have that right, or that at least Donald Trump wouldn't interpret it in the way it was supposed to be interpreted. You see, the interpretation from people like Richard Blumenthal, and probably from the people who modified that act back in 1861, and maybe even the people who instituted it, was that that sort of thing was only going to be for their use, not for the use of anyone else. It's only acceptable to protest or dissent in one direction. In the other direction, well, that's why they have laws. So will they be able to put constraints on Donald Trump? Is it legitimate in any way that Richard Blumenthal wants to try to pass legislation that will put constraints on Donald Trump? The Congress is illegitimate. The Senate is illegitimate. Joe Biden has never been president. So how are you supposed to pass this in any legitimate way? Well, they're trying to advertise the passage of it to gain a public mandate and convince the public that Donald Trump would not be doing something legal if one day it happened to be true, all of a sudden in the world, that Donald Trump had instituted the Insurrection Act back in, let's say, January of 2021, or if he were to do it in the future, or so we would be told. Now, on an informational timeline, the child brains, the standard issue villagers out there, have no idea that Donald Trump may have instituted the Insurrection Act on January 6th, 2021, or sometime before or after. He did, however, do the one thing required for him to do that. And they don't seem to have retreated. The foreign occupation that is being run complicit with a multitude of Americans has not actually dispersed in the last 4 years. So don't know what to tell you about that. Let's continue on. Some more fresh panic. And we're saying this is Mark Zaid or Mark Zaid. I'm not sure how he says it. We talked about him panicking last week. Here's another great addition.
This term, I represented several of his cabinet officers, many of the individuals who ended up writing books, and there were people in the first White House who would take documents off his desk so that he wouldn't see them and couldn't sign them. In this next administration, like some of the individuals you've talked about in your last segment and other times, those individuals we expect will be bringing documents to his desk for him to sign, whether he reads them or not. It's the people who will be surrounding him that we have the biggest concern about. Not just the cabinet members, who will be the deputies, the chief of staffs, the general counsels. That will determine the fears or level of fear anyone should have come January 20th.
More wonderful panic for a Friday. Let me pull up some more. This is from The Guardian on Monday. DOJ and FBI officials consult lawyers amid threats of Trump legal retribution. So, as we discussed yesterday, the DOJ, the FBI, the intel community, and the Department of Defense are all trying to gain access to the Trump transition so that they can vet all the nominees and candidates, so that they can monitor the emails and communications. Is this part of the reason for that? Now, the Matt Gaetz nomination, obviously that is past tense at this point, so we don't need to incorporate that part of it. But the threat of legal retribution in the eyes of these sorts of people surely has not diminished. Officials from the Justice Department and FBI have begun consulting lawyers amid fears that they will be prosecuted when Donald Trump returns to the White House. It has been reported. The concerns have been driven by Trump's vows to seek retribution against members of a deep state that he claims deliberately set out to undermine him when he was president and falsely alleges was weaponized against him after he left office. Now, on what basis is The Guardian saying that these are false allegations by Donald Trump? Robert Taint. Taint is how you say that. The I is the N in there. It's not a silent N. It's an audible N. It's just an invisible N. So that's what it is. Robert Taint at The Guardian. So this is Gaetz, blah, blah, blah. Several DOJ officials wept following Trump's resounding election victory over Kamala Harris, according to the network, upset that many Americans believed his narrative that the department had been corrupted and weaponized to conduct a political witch hunt against him. Everything we did was above board, said a former senior FBI official who had begun taking legal advice because of fear of prosecution. But this is a different world. Hey, man, maybe there's some way that these people are telling the truth. Maybe they're interviewing the good twin at the FBI. You always want to leave open the possibility. It's always possible. We could be reading the situation from the wrong direction. There's just not really any reason to believe that that's the case. But hey, man, who knows? We've been wrong before. Maybe we will determine that we're wrong again. A former senior Justice Department official who served during Trump's first term said the choice of Gaetz was a mark of the incoming president's seriousness about seeking payback against those he believed had wronged him. Wonder if they feel the same about Pam Bondi. He needs to be able to control the department, which he can do through a loyal attorney general beholden to him. And we just heard Zaid talking about how officials that served in the Trump administration, Zaid is now representing representing them. These were the people that would prevent documents from getting to Trump's desk. That is a coup. They are openly subverting the duly elected president of the United States of America. And that may be because they are all involved in running and operating that false reality layer of our government. And they don't want that crossing over into Trump's purview. So they prevented Trump from seeing those things whenever possible. But in terms of that base layer that Trump is actually running, maybe they thought they were going to get rid of him after one term and that would be it for Donald Trump. That's a subversion. That's a coup. That may well be treason against the United States of America. And the idea that these people are going to not face accountability for that, well, that seems crazy to me. Back to the article. Trump bearing a grudge, blah, blah, blah. Here we are. Oh, no, sorry. I thought there was one more comment from one of the people who was worried. We'll skip to the end. Observers say his goal is to assert control over the Justice Department, which has been conventionally viewed as politically independent from White House interference since Watergate. Ah, how cute. You see, they were able to take down a president and get him to be removed or remove himself from office. And since that time, they've been able to do whatever they want. And they've told the American public that it's because the Justice Department must remain independent, which is clearly not the case at all. And there is direct contact between the illegitimate Biden administration and those people prosecuting Donald Trump. Joe Biden's, fake prosecutions, whatever, but we're seeing the story. So in the story context, Joe Biden's very real presidential administration is prosecuting Donald Trump directly. So where is the DOJ independence? The truth is that it's nowhere. And hopefully we will be able to have a term of Donald Trump without any subversion from these various parties. But it does not look like we're off to a good start there, which is totally unsurprising. For a year almost now, I talked about how the regime's best case scenario for the fake election would be to declare a Donald Trump victory that would make all of MAGA and Republican voters, the centrists who voted Republican, attest to the legitimacy of the elections. And then we would be told that Donald Trump had a very small win, which is what we're now being told. It's down to about 2.52 million difference between Trump and Kamala, according to the so-called official counts. So a small victory for Donald Trump, but nonetheless one that reaffirmed the legitimacy of the system in the eyes of all those people who have doubted it in the past. And if that weren't bad enough, we've also attested to the legitimacy of all of the people they've installed at state and local levels and throughout the rest of the federal government. And now we are ready to watch as the administration is subverted once again, just running the same playbook, and everyone went along with it because we still have to pretend that our elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported results accurately reflect the will and intent of the American voters, when of course they do nothing of the sort. And hey, this is why you go with the truth right from the very beginning. You go with the principled stand rather than trying to map out and figure out and justify exactly how doing the wrong thing will actually lead to better conclusions that are intellectually and morally justifiable. Of course, they weren't. And that's the problem with the testing to a fake election being real in advance because you think you might win, because you think you might win it this time. It was always a terrible idea. And I think, and I hope that now we're beginning to be able to see why. And, you know, people demand the hose again. They're going to get the hose again. We are now seeing people begin to get the hose again. And it's probably going to get worse as they continue to delegitimize Trump and attempt to contest him in every way. And again, maybe we just need to see all this happening because got to wake up more normies or something. Maybe people have to really learn the lesson that this all is a bullshit soap opera where they show you the same series of reruns over and over and over again. It's like every 5 years on the soap operas, probably even less now because who cares? Oh, one of the characters has amnesia. You just give a character a car crash and the character gets amnesia. And now they can just begin to have an entirely different life. Oh, hey, this character doesn't really work anymore, and we have to fire the actor who plays their love interest. Let's just give the character amnesia, and we can change the character completely, and no one will even question it. Now, I don't know anyone in real life who has ever had amnesia. And hey, guys, put a 1 in the chat if you know anyone who has ever had amnesia, like who hit their head really hard or got struck by lightning. They were in a car crash. Maybe they did some heavy drugs. Who knows what it was? Do you know someone who had amnesia for whatever reason, or do they all only exist on network soap operas? I have a feeling it's only network soap operas. Clinical Cynic says Joe Biden. Well, all right, you got me. Everyone else is saying nope. So I'm gonna assume that I'm not crazy here, wondering if maybe amnesia is not real. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure it's possible to whatever degree. I mean, hey, the soap operas, they wouldn't lie or attempt to emotionally exploit us or anything. I mean, isn't it amazing? Just every day, you're like, oh, it's time to turn on the emotional exploitation. Let me push a couple of buttons, and then that box on the wall will begin to emotionally exploit me on purpose. Oh, it feels so good. Where are the bonbons? It's crazy. Justice officials panicking. Let's go back to that. Why would the justice officials be panicking unless they were actually involved in a total subversion of the American president? And here is some video. Here is some video from my pal Patriots Are in Control from Monday, talking about the panic over at the DOJ. Oh, hold for processing. Everything is going wrong.
A sense of alarm is building among officials at the Justice Department and the FBI who are bracing for possible revenge prosecutions from the incoming Trump administration. NBC News reports that some civil servants who work on a government salary have proactively reached out to lawyers. That's according to 3 people with knowledge of their deliberations. They're worried about the effect of long and costly legal battles. Joining me here in studio, NBC News senior executive editor for national security, David Rode, who reported this story. Also with us, Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. It's good to have you here, David. A lot of DOJ staffers we had been hearing and you had been reporting were saying there was some nervousness about what might happen, about, frankly, what has been said about the plans for going after people who they felt unfairly went after them. But how has the choice of Matt Gaetz changed the equation, or has it?
It has, and that's the difference. There was worry about congressional investigations. They expected that, but the choice of Gaetz, which was, I think, a real surprise to many people inside the DOJ, signaled everywhere, yes, that he's a lawyer, but he's had no experience prosecuting cases. But most of all, he is a firebrand loyalist, a very vocal supporter of President Trump. And it's seen by people as a choice. It's someone who Trump trusts, and someone who, given the ethics investigation, sort of owes Trump. Trump is sort of protecting him by giving him this new job just before the ethics report comes out. So it has raised fears that there could actually be criminal investigations and prosecutions by the Trump administration of career DOJ and FBI officials.
And so that is part of the narrative that is developing, including from some DeSantis cuck simp supporters like Josh Hammer and Dave Rubin. They're saying that, they're going along with these claims against Matt Gaetz being important allegations that are actually the cause of him withdrawing his name, and proposing that perhaps Donald Trump offered him this attorney general role so that he could resign from the Congress and shut down that ethics committee investigation. So conspiracy theory, hey, maybe they're right. Maybe there's some ploy by Donald Trump. It's just weird that these guys would be supporting that theory because A, it kind of accepts that there is, where there's smoke, there's fire kind of claim against Gaetz. And also that Donald Trump is doing something potentially untoward in protecting Matt Gaetz in that way. So it's no surprise. These are people who went after Donald Trump and went after MAGA throughout the Ron Op, and maybe they're kayfabe, but just doesn't seem like it because they seem to genuinely hate Trump supporters, and they are years behind on an informational timeline, which leaves them lying to their audiences all the time at best. And it's possible that they might just be morons who called Joe Biden president for the last 4 years and have to stay within that framework, or else admit that they accepted the usurpation of the United States of America and aren't in any way faithful Americans or diehard conservatives as they portray themselves. And it's so weird too, because Dave Rubin is a gay dad. Like, he's not a diehard conservative. It doesn't even make sense. And he's a statist, and Josh Hammer is a statist, and both of them are Israel cucks as well. So, I mean, the whole thing just goes on and on and on. These people are pathetic. Anyhow, as for the DOJ and the FBI panicking about a Trump attorney general, you have to wonder how many times we're going to see that cycle. Will we see it with Pam Bondi? I don't know, but it would be pretty funny for them to say that the people at the FBI and the DOJ are panicking about every single possible attorney general as though they might have done something wrong. And of course, they have done things wrong quite a bit certainly over the last 4 years, over the last 9 years, but probably a lot longer than that. And again, we're getting reruns. And the idea of reruns in this fashion is that there are new stories that sometimes feature the same characters, but will always feature the same sort of necessary exposure to the public saying, yes, this sort of thing happens. Yes, this sort of thing happens for these sorts of reasons. Understand that this thing happens because every time you see it, this is going to be the framework. This is going to be the lesson that you need to take away from each of these new events. And so hopefully all of those will actually take. Once we reach a critical mass and people learn the lesson from the reruns, we get to move on. But it's like, in grade school where you can't move on to the next grade until you've completed the one. And if you can't complete it, then you have to repeat a year. And I guess maybe there are kids that have to do that multiple times. I don't know. But it's kind of that kind of thing. And we're going to have to keep seeing these stories until everybody gets that these stories are bullshit. Or in the case of the FBI and DOJ employees who are panicking, that they actually did something wrong in going after Donald Trump or going after people in the past using those same means. But Rico Grande, the massive civil RICO case that Donald Trump filed against Hillary Clinton et al., that seems to be incorporating the special counsel evidence as it is built and compiled by people like John Durham over the past few years. That is going to play someday, and that is all about Russiagate and everything that spun off of Russiagate, which of course involves the DOJ and the FBI. Let us continue to some more wonderful panic. It really is incredible how long we've been able to track this storyline about people fleeing the country. There was not a similar storyline. I think it's worth noting there was not a similar storyline after the fake, rigged, stolen 2020 election about Trump supporters fleeing the country. This is from CNN. And of course, CNN has a paywall. CNN is apparently trying to make money through subscriptions now. So this is the archive link of this CNN article. Political and this is from Wednesday, by the way, political and social division is driving interest in golden visas. Europe could soon be welcoming a wave of well-heeled Americans as Democrat voters facing the prospect of another Donald Trump presidency eye refuges abroad. Interest in so-called golden visas has skyrocketed among U.S. citizens since the election, according to consultants that help the wealthy migrate. Golden visas allow people to effectively buy foreign citizenship or residence through sizable investments, including in real estate, government bonds, or startups. Isn't that amazing? You can purchase citizenship in another country by funding their political agendas. Isn't that incredible? That's what globalists have been doing in the United States forever. And you got to wonder, is this how George Soros became American? We're always told that Soros is an American investor. George Soros is a Hungarian who literally helped the Nazis round up his neighbors and to put them on the trains. Now, of course, that makes complete and total sense because that was when the Nazis were working in partnership with the Zionists to confiscate Jewish property and ship European Jews down to the territory of Palestine so they could establish the global regime proxy state of Israel. So it, of course, makes sense that George Soros is still involved in exactly the same project 80 years later. Is it 80 years? Yeah, it's got to be close to 80 years. How old is George Soros? Goodness. I mean, honestly, when was the born in August of 1930? So he is 94 years old. Wow. Now, do I need to pull up the 60? I don't think I need to pull up the 60 Minutes interview with Soros where he talks about it himself, just for anyone who's new here and wandering in off the Rumble page or the YouTube page and thinking George Soros can't be a Nazi. George Soros is Jewish. Okay. Well, here's the thing. One, Zionists partnered with Nazis, and two, that's all you need to know. Okay, let's get back to CNN. Henley and Partners, which claims to have invented the concept of citizenship by investment in the 1990s, said inquiries by U.S. nationals via its website spiked almost 400% the week of the election compared with the week prior. Many of these individuals don't plan on permanently relocating to a new country. However, the main focus for most Americans is just having the optionality, like an insurance policy, said Dominic Volek, head of private clients at Henley and Partners. So other migration consultancies, there's rising U.S. demand. Inquiries about golden visas from Americans have increased 33% so far this year compared with the same period last year, with programs in Europe the most sought after. Portugal's Golden Residence Permit program tops the popularity list because it is relatively affordable, requiring a minimum outlay of 250,000 euros, about $265,000, in support of the arts or national cultural heritage. It also offers a path to European Union citizenship after only 5 years, as opposed to 7 to 10 years in countries such as Greece, Spain, and Italy, which are also popular choices among Americans. The super rich, those with a net worth of $50 million and above, tend to favor Malta or Austria, according to Volek, which offer immediate paths to citizenship, but it's at a much higher price. Malta's 600,000 euros. With golden visas out of reach for most Americans, social media platforms are ablaze with chatter about other avenues for moving abroad. On Reddit, one thread titled "Emigrating After the U.S. Election Results" has received 1,300 comments in less than 2 weeks. In an LGBT Reddit group, one user posted shortly before the election that they and their husband feel that leaving the USA as refugees may be necessary if Trump ends up winning. Oh, yes, it is so scary out there. These individuals don't want to surrender their U.S. citizenship. However, there's a sense that I'm leaving because I have to, and I want to make sure that my vote still counts. So they want to go away. They're too scared to remain in the U.S. because the television has scared the shit out of them, despite Donald Trump not actually wanting to do anything to normal people whatsoever. Hey, gays, Donald Trump isn't coming after you unless you have molested children or, been involved in human trafficking or committed other crimes that have nothing to do with your gayness. You don't have to leave the country because you're gay. I mean, you could stop being gay, but you don't have to leave the country. No one's coming after you. I know. You were born that way. Let's go here to the Wall Street Journal. This is from Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. There we are. Wednesday, Wall Street Journal. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the Doge plan to reform government. So Elon and Vivek are publishing this op-ed together. I would imagine that Grok AI wrote it and they slapped their names on it. I'm kidding, of course. Sort of. Our nation was founded on the basic idea that the people we elect run the government. That isn't how America functions today. Most legal edicts aren't laws enacted by Congress, but rules and regulations promulgated by unelected bureaucrats, tens of thousands of them each year. Most government enforcement decisions and discretionary expenditures aren't made by the democratically elected president or even his political appointees, but by millions of unelected, unappointed civil servants within government agencies who view themselves as immune from firing thanks to civil service protections. Now, that couldn't be put any clearer. That is exactly the situation we find ourselves in. And if you pay attention to this part right here, well, I guess it's the whole thing, really. But we are not being run by a system of laws. We are being run by a system of rules and regulations, a false reality layer on top of our constitutional republic that governs absolutely everything from what our businesses are allowed to do, to the things that we're allowed to say, and to the ways that we vote. And that's just what our country has become. It is a bureaucracy. It is probably the world's highest form of a communist bureaucracy. And it's right here in the United States, layered on top of our constitutional republic. We are told that we are the freest country in the world while we are governed by unelected, unappointed bureaucrats who can't be fired and can't be held accountable in any way. We talked about this yesterday. They can't be fired, and the politicians themselves who work in conjunction with them can't be removed because we have fake elections. How are we the model for freedom for the rest of the world? We're not a model of freedom at all. We're a model of the best that the global regime agenda can produce. They can actually subvert and infiltrate and take over the most powerful country in the history of the world and turn it into a communist bureaucracy. So the idea that it couldn't happen here, or the idea that we are automatically protected because of our Constitution, is preposterous. They subverted our Constitution a long time ago. We pay lip service to a Constitution now, but it's not one capable of preventing these sorts of things from happening. These sorts of things are already baked into the cake. Where are we? This is anti-democratic and antithetical to the founder's vision. It imposes massive direct and indirect costs on taxpayers. Thankfully, we have a historic opportunity to solve the problem. On November 5th, voters decisively elected Donald Trump with a mandate for sweeping change, and they deserve to get it. Now, again, we don't have to belabor this, but that is the narrative. That is an expression of Donald Trump's real mandate that comes from the collective will of the people. But there is nothing about the quote unquote election that is said to have happened on November 5th that is suggestive of a broad public mandate. He's under 50%, which is only a plurality in the so-called popular vote, and his electoral college win in the story's framing is also just an average size electoral college win. That's not taking anything away from Donald Trump. It is taking away from our purported legitimate elections, which are anything but legitimate. President Trump has asked the two of us to lead a newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to cut the federal government down to size. The entrenched and ever-growing bureaucracy represents an existential threat to our republic. Politicians have abetted it for too long. That's why we're doing things differently. We are entrepreneurs, not politicians. We will serve as outside volunteers, not federal officials or employees. Unlike government commissions or advisory committees, we won't just write reports or cut ribbons. We'll cut costs. We are assisting the Trump transition team to identify and hire a lean team of small government crusaders, including some of the sharpest technical and legal minds in America. This team will work in the new administration closely with the White House Office of Management and Budget. That's the OMB. That's what we talked about. Potentially Russ Vought being the head of. Russ Vought, critical in the creation of the Project 2025 agenda. Is the Project 2025 agenda still just a scarecrow being used by the left, by the regime, by the Uniparty to score political points against Donald Trump? And then is Donald Trump hijacking and co-opting the creation of that to push his agenda through while allowing people associated with Project 2025 to be spotlighted and then removed over the course of this transition, in quotes? We shall see. The two of us will advise DOGE at every step to pursue three major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. We will focus particularly on driving change through executive action based on existing legislation rather than by passing new laws. That's huge. Our North Star, and again, passing new laws at this point in Congress requires getting them attached to spending bills for the most part. That is what we have seen. Getting them to be attached to anything ultimately, because they will not take up single subject spending bills. Who fought for that in the last Congress? Matt Gaetz. That was a concession that he had supposedly won from Kevin McCarthy, and it never actually was implemented. They never actually did that. And ultimately, Kevin McCarthy was removed again by Matt Gaetz, right? Didn't he press that? I believe he did. All this is interconnected and has to remain interconnected to kind of understand the big picture here. But it's great that they won't be trying to do any of that through passing new laws, because we don't need more laws, and we don't want anything else piled onto new laws, which is what gets the buy-in enough to pass them. Everybody's beak has to get wet. In West Virginia, our North Star for reform will be the U.S. Constitution, with a focus on two critical Supreme Court rulings issued during Biden's tenure. And that, of course, is very important. Hopefully that would be the original Constitution, understood in the original manner, and not this subversion of the Constitution, this false reality layer put on top, inversion of the Constitution, I should say, which is also a subversion. In West Virginia, the EPA in 2022, the justices held that agencies can't impose regulations dealing with major economic or policy questions unless Congress specifically authorizes them to do so. That is wonderful. So all of those need to somehow be stripped away, assuming that they aren't already. In Loper Bright v. Raimundo of 2024, the court overturned the Chevron doctrine. So the first is the major questions doctrine. Then here we have the Chevron doctrine, and held that federal courts should no longer defer to federal agencies' interpretations of the law or their own rulemaking authority. So the federal courts are actually able to judge the regulations and the rules put in place by the agencies in terms of their constitutionality, and not just simply defer to those agencies because they have, or at least are purported to have, been given the authority to create rules and regulations by Congress, which is just the Congress abandoning its own responsibility to be the accountable body passing laws. And if those laws can't be passed, and the people will, without the people holding those representatives accountable and removing them from office, then it is illegitimate from the foundational level. And again, you can't hold them accountable without legitimate elections. Together, these cases suggest that a plethora of current federal regulations exceed the authority Congress has granted under the law and are just blatantly unconstitutional. DOJ will work with legal experts embedded in government agencies aided by advanced technology to apply these rulings to federal regulations enacted by such agencies. DOJ will present this list of regulations to President Trump, who can, by executive action, immediately pause the enforcement of those regulations and initiate the process for review and rescission. This would liberate individuals and businesses from illicit regulations never passed by Congress and stimulate the U.S. economy. So immediately, much of the administrative state could be eliminated in one fell swoop. Their ability to enact and enforce the rules and regulations, well, that's their most critical role. And once that goes away, their purpose goes away. It also frees up, who knows how many parts of American society in order to be able to pursue innovation and entrepreneurship and artistic endeavors, and who knows what else, without those rules and regulations constricting their behavior and ultimately providing advantages for people, individuals, entities, companies, NGOs, etc., aligned with the federal government. It's going to change everything. I mean, assuming this stuff goes, it's going to change everything. This is all part of what I call the American Renaissance. and it is a return to the prior form, which we have to recognize as the purpose of all of this. When the president nullifies thousands of such regulations, critics will allege executive overreach. In fact, it will be correcting the executive overreach of thousands of regulations promulgated by administrative fiat that were never authorized by Congress. The president owes lawmaking deference to Congress, not to bureaucrats deep within federal agencies. The use of executive orders to substitute for lawmaking by adding burdensome new rules is a constitutional affront. But the use of executive orders to roll back regulations that wrongly bypassed Congress is legitimate and necessary to comply with the Supreme Court's recent mandates. So not only is Donald Trump doing something he's allowed to do, he's doing something, in this case, this hypothetical, that he must do so that he is in alignment and that the executive branch is voluntarily in alignment with the Supreme Court. That's how the Constitution is supposed to work. That's how the checks and balances of the system are supposed to work. But in the model we see now, the illegitimate Biden regime, of course, however unseriously they should be taken, but whatever other potential uniparty regime would be in that place would not voluntarily rescind rules and regulations from the executive branch agencies. They would wait for all of those things to be challenged in court and then have them slowly removed one by one while waging lawfare and making it take absolutely as long as possible, which is a direct affront to the checks and balances that are supposed to be built into the system. So once again, you see the removal of the false reality layer and the return to the constitutional republic base layer, and maybe to layers below that. Back to the article. After those regulations are fully rescinded, a future president couldn't simply flip the switch and revive them, but would instead have to ask Congress to do so. And then Congress would have to proactively delegate specific authorities to the agencies. And in truth, hopefully the agencies will have been removed before Congress ever has the opportunity to do so. So Congress would once again have to stand up and delegate their authority to newly created executive branch agencies that would then have to promulgate these rules under oversight by the Supreme Court. And the precedent set in these decisions that make sure the Congress is doing its constitutional duty in actually legislating rather than delegating those authorities to unelected, unaccountable federal branch, executive branch agencies. A drastic reduction in federal regulations provides sound industrial logic for mass headcount reductions across the federal bureaucracy. DOJ intends to work with embedded appointees in agencies to identify the minimum number of employees required at an agency for it to perform its constitutionally permissible and statutorily mandated functions. The number of federal employees to cut should be at least proportionate to the number of federal regulations that are nullified. Not only are fewer employees required to enforce fewer regulations, but the agency would produce fewer regulations once its scope of authority is properly limited. Employees whose positions are eliminated deserve to be treated with respect, and DOJ's goal is to help support their transition into the private sector. The president can use existing laws to give them incentives for early retirement and to make voluntary severance payments to facilitate a graceful exit. And that would be wonderful. And, you know, again, we can despise the fact that the government has been usurped, that this administrative and bureaucratic state and deep state have been built without hating the people working in it, some of whom have done nothing wrong. There are a great many who have done things wrong, and those people should be held accountable, and we do not need to feel the same sympathy for them, but that is not all 2 million of these people. So to move them into the private sector, it's probably going to be great for innovation. There will be people with certain experience who can move into the private sector and be good advisors rather than the sort of plants that move back and forth between government and the private sector to ease the complicity and collusion on both ends. We don't want that. But people moving to the private sector and innovating and creating new businesses that actually serve and a purpose in the market and have value in the market and value in the country, all that's wonderful. We should want those people to have some sort of smooth transition so that they can be helpful to the project of the American Renaissance. We don't want to just cut everybody off and send not only these people and their lives and their families and whatever into a tailspin, but all of a sudden people lose their homes. That sends the real estate market into a tailspin. They lose their buying power, which sends other markets into a tailspin. There's got to be some sort of, what would you call it? A smooth landing, and this is what we have to do. I mean, so much of the work has been done, but ultimately we got to stick the landing. And that includes Donald Trump as well. Conventional wisdom holds that statutory civil service protections stop the president or even his political appointees from firing federal workers. The purpose of these protections is to protect employees from political retaliation. But the statute allows for reductions in force that don't target specific employees. The truth is, the statute should not matter and ultimately will not matter. The statute further empowers the president to prescribe rules governing the competitive service. And I'm saying that, of course, because the statutes, when they conflict with the Constitution, are null and void, and the president should have the power to eliminate from the executive branch anyone he wants for whatever reason. Elon and Vivek write that power is broad. Previous presidents have used it to amend the civil service rules by executive order, and the Supreme Court has held in Franklin v. Massachusetts in 92 and Collins v. Yellen in 2021 that they weren't constrained by the Administrative Procedures Act when they did so. And again, just like yesterday, we see that these acts do not in any way do what they are claimed to do, because what they are claimed to do would be unconstitutional. So all of that is null and void. We are told that it would be a violation for the presidents to do these sorts of things. And what they generally mean is, we're going to raise legal hell if you do these things. They rarely ever get up to the Supreme Court, so we never actually get these sorts of decisions. Now we do, and we find in every case that the false reality layer is false. It's not constitutional. It's usurping constitutional authority, and whatever authority that layer is given in a constitutional manner, it is overreaching on that authority. With this authority, Mr. Trump can implement any number of, quote, rules governing the competitive service, end quote, that would curtail administrative overgrowth, from large-scale firings to relocation of federal agencies out of the Washington area. Requiring federal employees to come to the office 5 days a week would result in a wave of voluntary terminations that we welcome. If federal employees don't want to show up, American taxpayers shouldn't pay them for the COVID-era privilege of staying home. Are they even working at all? Are they just staying home and collecting a paycheck? And has that been ongoing for years? And if it has been for years, was that their severance period? And is that level of the federal government already removed? These are things that we should at least consider, okay? I can't prove to you that that's how it is, but if we just at least consider things through that framing, we might find that framing applying consistently in the same direction all the time, which is actually better evidence of it being real than some documents you might find at NARA, which is why the documents only people often end up being gatekeepers of information and wrong all the time, which is why the mainstream media encourages everyone to be documents people. Hey, well, if you can't find the documents, then you can't say it's true. And then they just make sure you can't find the documents, so you can't say anything that conflicts with them under that rubric. which is why it's so stupid and anti-intellectual to depend on government documents to prove things. It's ridiculous. I can't believe people who do that are taken seriously, to be honest. It's an absurd standard of epistemology. It's an absurd standard of evidence. And it's one that we are told actually represents a legitimate standard of epistemology and evidence in the courtroom. Well, hey, our courts are also unconstitutional and run on the wrong bases for things exactly like that. And it has been to everyone's detriment that a court standard for proof beyond a reasonable doubt and proof constituting government documents is actually a desirable thing. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal procedure, that's great. In fact, we should be even more stringent about what proof represents in those cases and eliminate things like DNA, for instance. But gosh, man, proof for evidence that something is true or false in a situation where it is going to be always in the eye of the beholder based on certain epistemological problems. Gosh, man, it is amazing to me what the sleeping brain that believes it's awakened still accepts from that period of sleep. These styles of gaining information and forming beliefs are totally obsolete. Not that they ever should have been taken seriously in the first place. They were just things that were inculcated into all of us, including me at one time. Okay. There's still things that we have to move away from. A Rumble rant from Steph Asia, $20. Thanks for the live stream, Chris. Thanks to you, Steph Asia, and to everyone else who is hanging out. And this is kind of cool, honestly. There's, I guess, 460 people hanging out on Rumble, something like that, and a few hanging out on YouTube, though I've never used YouTube till about 2 weeks ago. So the fact that it is there at all is very cool. Finally, we are focused on, and I'm not saying that YouTube is cool. It's just like, you know, if there are people watching over there and we're finding them over there rather than on Telegram, rather than on Truth Social, rather than on Rumble, cool. You know, people are like, YouTube is the devil. Okay, well, that's true. Twitter is still a censored platform, but no one seems to be mad at Twitter because God King Elon has bestowed some portion of free speech back to us, and we, groveling on our knees, glorify him for that act, which he probably had very little to do with. But again, I like Elon Musk. He's a wonderful face for all of this. I am thankful for what he's doing, but we don't need to go too far. Finally, we are focused on delivering cost savings for taxpayers. Skeptics question how much federal spending DOGE can tame through executive action alone. They point to the 1974 Impoundment Control Act, which stops the president from ceasing expenditures authorized by Congress. Mr. Trump has previously suggested this statute is unconstitutional. And we believe the current Supreme Court would likely side with him on this question. And again, they're exactly right about that. And Donald Trump has said he's going to be doing this. And Donald Trump, there's good reason to believe, has probably already done this, or will write it in executive order on day one, which will be the public display of him having done that. And immediately it will be in effect. So all of a sudden, all the spending that Congress has passed over these past couple of years will be gone. And has passed in the more distant past as well. So what has the Congress done during this pause period, during this hidden Trump term where Trump is off stage despite having obviously won the 2020 election? What has the Congress done besides pass nonsense laws that don't really have any legitimate enforcement mechanism? There's no way to keep them around. All they've done is spread regime fiat currency to regime affiliated entities, whether they are the proxy states, whether they are NGOs, whether they are regime-linked corporations. What happens when that spending is no longer there? What happens to all those organizations depending on the continuance of those fiat dollars flowing inward? Now, will those organizations privatize themselves and continue receiving fiat regime currency and philanthropist donations and the rest of it? Yeah, they probably will. And that currency eventually will be brought back under a more stable form at some point, hopefully pinned to Bitcoin. It seems like that's where we're going. At that point, that regime fiat that they'll be sending around won't really be worth anything. And it will be pretty clear that the people benefiting from that will be criminals working to subvert the legitimate constitutional republic and its representative in Donald Trump. So again, all of this is going to look like drainage. It will have various cover stories. It seems particularly the whole Doge thing. This is a cover story and a public disclosure of the dismantling of the false reality layer of our constitutional republic. That is what it's going to be. Okay. And we're going to be told stories about what it is so that people who aren't familiar with this concept and who would think all of this would be Trump as dictator will have an understanding of what's going on. This is not Trump being a dictator. This is the country being restored to its constitutional foundation. Okay. We're removing the false reality layer and returning to the reality prime constitutional republic layer. Where are we here? After the Impoundment Control Act, which Donald Trump will definitely already be using. But even without relying on that view, Doge will help end federal overspending by taking aim at the $500 billion plus in annual federal expenditures that are unauthorized by Congress or being used in ways that Congress never intended, from $535 million a year to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and $1.5 billion for grants to international organizations to nearly $300 million to progressive groups like Planned Parenthood. $500 billion a year in federal expenditures that were never authorized even by Congress. How is something like that possible? $500 billion? But it's way more than that, of course, because the Congress has, because the Congress is not spending through any of these agencies and through much of this foreign aid in ways that are constitutional in the first place. This stuff is going to have to be removed. Donald Trump, I believe, will remove it or has already removed it. And we're going to see that process continue in earnest in a publicly acknowledged fashion in the quote unquote next term. The federal government's oh gosh, I can't read anything. My tongue doesn't move properly today. It is one of those times where you bite the side of your tongue and it is like the most painful thing that you've ever experienced for a while. Let's try this again. The federal government's procurement process is also badly broken. Many federal contracts have gone unexamined for years. How does that happen? Don't they have a fiduciary duty on behalf of the American people? They are meant to be serving as quote unquote public servants to spend the people's money wisely. That is like part of the oath. Systematic robbery. And it's because they claim the justification for taxation and because the American people file their taxes, providing the government an enforcement mechanism so they can then extract taxpayer monies for unconstitutional and totally unexamined and unauthorized expenditures. And it just goes on and on and on like that, supporting the global regime's infrastructure that exists within the federal government and outside the federal government, so that all of society conforms to the same regime's agenda and is financially incentivized to do so. The Pentagon recently failed its 7th consecutive audit, suggesting that the agency's leadership has little idea how its annual budget of more than $800 billion is spent. Critics claim that we can't meaningfully close the federal deficit without taking aim at entitlement programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which require Congress to shrink. But this deflects attention from the sheer magnitude of waste, fraud, and abuse that nearly all taxpayers wish to end, and that DOJ aims to address by identifying pinpoint executive actions that would result in immediate savings for taxpayers. With a decisive electoral mandate and a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, DOJ has a historic opportunity for structural reductions in the federal government. We are prepared for the onslaught from entrenched interests in Washington. We expect to prevail. Now is the moment for decisive action. Our top goal for DOJ is to eliminate the need for its existence by July 4th, 2026, the expiration date we have set for our project. There is no better birthday gift for our nation on its 250th anniversary than to deliver a federal government that would make our founders proud. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, the 250th anniversary is the anniversary of the Declaration for Independence. It is not the anniversary for the Constitution. Okay? That considers the birthplace, the birth date of our nation, July 4th, 1776. That's not the ratification of the Constitution. And in that Declaration of Independence, it says that we have not only the right, but the duty to throw off a government of exactly this kind. That is our founders' intent at the formation of this nation. The Declaration of Independence contains within it the duty for the American people to throw off a government of exactly this kind. And that is what's happening. Donald Trump said in his Agenda 47 videos, I believe this one might have come out even in 2022. If not, then it's well over a year old. But he talked about, in fact, you know what? I think it came out while I was at CPAC in 2023. So that would be early March or maybe even mid-March of 2023. And he talked about there being a birthday party, a 250th birthday party for the United States of America that would begin on Memorial Day of 2025 and would end on July 4th of 2026. Just coincidentally, the last date of this DOJ project is the DOJ project just disclosure for the already dismantled false reality layer of the federal government. And I suggest to you that that is exactly what it is. It is nothing less and nothing more. And we are going to see them do a podcast where they tell us step by step what parts of the federal government they are removing and why. And that will be very important to get public buy-in. So I'm all for it as an info op, but we don't need to pretend that it's real. Okay. Donald Trump has already accomplished these things. That is my position. It has been my position for the entire time while people call us crazy. And again, you don't have to see it. Not everybody's going to see it. I am telling you how to see it. And if you see it, wonderful. Then you will come on over to my side and we will have eliminated yet another layer of the false reality. Because it's one thing to eliminate the false reality layer of the federal government. It is another thing to eliminate the false reality layer of our belief systems and the false reality layer of our lives that we inevitably conform to under the guise of it being real. When we understand the false reality layer, then we can eliminate it. And then we no longer have to correspond our actions and reactions to that false reality layer, which means that we are able to operate closer to reality prime. And so we should detect that false reality layer wherever it exists and then move away from it. All it takes is the noticing and the recognition. And if we need the story to illustrate it for us and for the people in our lives, that's fine. Okay? But we don't have to interact with that layer as though it's real. We can say, yes, my friend, my standard issue villager, who I would love to see turn himself or herself into a redeemable communist, disavow all that prior communism. You were brainwashed into it. You were influenced. The party of false decorum, the incentive and punishment structure set up around the formation and the protection of those beliefs. We all get it. Many of us have been there. I certainly have. But now you can disavow that global communism. You can come on over, make yourself a redeemable communist, leave all that behind, and help us usher in the American Renaissance. And you will be more than welcome. We will all love to see you on that side of the fence coming, which is why we don't want all the gatekeepers out there telling us that we must protect the storytellers at this layer at all costs. Okay? Are they doing it for our benefit? Maybe. Are they definitely doing it for our benefit? No, not definitely. It's entirely possible that there is this other op that's going on that just so happens to include these things, but it will attempt at some point to divert the America First agenda, the agenda of the multipolar world order as it emerges, the sovereign agenda, to something else that would be way more constrictive than what we had before. Okay? We have to recognize that all the time as a threat because we are working with necessarily imperfect information. If there wasn't the fog of the information war and we had perfect information in real time, then we wouldn't have to worry about whether or not we're making a mistake by just going along with these people and what their agenda is and the stories that they tell us. But we can see ahead of their informational timeline in the stories that they're telling us. They're telling us stories that are in the informational timeline of the people who are still asleep. And they're not telling those stories at a pace that changes the informational timeline relative to those people. So why would we just accept that what they're doing is good? The outcome of what they're doing right now at this point in time, might be good in the future. It also might not be. Right now, it's not good. Right now, they're still lying. That is all we're able to tell. And I think that we will see over time that the elimination of parts of the federal government has already happened, and that the Doge op will be the disclosure of that having already happened, which means we don't need to cheer it on. We need to understand what is happening on that reality prime layer that story is illustrating, and then focus on the truth of that event at the reality prime layer while saying, hey, fun story, guys. Gosh, what a wonderful illustration of that story you have convinced us is actually playing out in reality. We should hope that we don't have to see more destructive false flag events to coincide with those stories. And if we do see false flag events coinciding with those stories and the need to eliminate this agency because they just did this thing that just happened, we'll be able to see in real life, in real time, that those events aren't true. Okay? The reality prime element of what is being removed is good and necessary. And we can applaud that and celebrate that without playing into the story. At some point, wouldn't it be better if we didn't actually need the stories playing out in reality, or in a reality that we're told about, a reality we are convinced to believe and that we will believe because the TV is showing us? If we can eliminate the storytelling, the need for the trauma to be, inflicted via storytelling on TV. If we can wean ourselves off that and understand at a principled level the lesson of that story without having to go through the experience of that story and people believing that story, then we are operating in a better fashion intellectually and morally. And I don't know if there is a refutation of that. I haven't heard it. And it's unfortunate because no one's able to have this conversation, because we have the gatekeepers and the people operating on that story level unwilling to engage these ideas to find out what they think about them, whether or not they are aware of these things and how they might interact Because maybe, just maybe, Tucker Carlson's audience is ready to just hear the truth about the government being dismantled because it's been a fake government throughout their entire lives. Maybe they're ready for that. And Tucker Carlson's not giving that to them, which is keeping them necessarily behind. Now, you can say that I'm just wrong about all that, but I really don't think so. And we've been going on about this for 4 years. This understanding of what's happening actually does map onto the reality that they are projecting as well. So to assume that it is only their story happening is crazy. If I was way off, it shouldn't be able to map on to not only the reality that we perceive in our world, but the reality they project on television. And I would argue that it gives a better explanation for what we are seeing in the world and what we are seeing on television than the explanation from television. Because the television explanation might make sense for an individual issue, but it doesn't make sense overall. It is totally incoherent overall. And they can't actually explain many important elements of their own story, which is why you're a conspiracy theorist if you ask. Okay. I want to hit one more thing and then we'll get out of here. I know that we're already at 2 hours, and hopefully people will just consider it as a little bit of making up for lost time over the past few weeks instead of me indulging myself and my interests and your attention at low value. And I hope that it's not that. I don't think it is that. I just am conscious of there being a lot of information that everyone is trying to consume and me not attempting to dominate that, because people should be making their own decisions. And if they come in my direction, wonderful. I guess there's an argument to be made that all of you had. So I assume that we are on safe ground here, but hey, stable ground, whatever you want to call it. The American Conservative, this is from Tuesday, November 19th. Douglas Macgregor and Dave Ramaswamy, not Vivek for once. Vivek is everywhere. The American Conservative, Trump and the Storm of the Century. What a provocative headline that is. We just heard from the good Colonel yesterday in his discussion of the fakery surrounding the paragliding go-kart incident of October 7th. The fear in many nations' capitals. Wait, hold on. Let me see. Yes, I think I remember this as not all that long. So we're going to try to go through this whole thing. The fear in many nations' capitals is that President Donald Trump's return to Washington might make Israel feel more confident in attacking Iran. According to Mike Evans, founder of the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem, there is no world leader Trump respects more than Netanyahu. Okay, Mike Evans, I suppose no one would know better than you at the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem. But it's possible that there are world leaders Trump respects more than Netanyahu, including all of the world leaders he said far more respectful things about than Netanyahu. What a silly, silly notion. But hey, man, it's true in the story sense from the perspective of Colonel Macgregor, so we might as well take it seriously. The evangelical leader also confides that President Trump would support an Israeli attack before his inauguration on the assumption that the destruction of Iran's oil production facilities would devastate Iran's economy, inducing Iran to end the war with Israel before President Trump assumes his office. This thinking by no means excludes an Israeli decision to strike Iran's nuclear development sites as well. I cannot imagine that President Trump would actually support that in any real way. Now, maybe he supports it in a narrative sense. Maybe this is something that we have to be shown or will be shown inevitably, whether or not we have to. And of course, I would make the argument that we don't have to be shown that. I think we could actually just accelerate people into a truth-telling phase where they accept lots of things like that without having to see kinetic warfare on their televisions. But, I'm not writing the program. It's not my playbook that's being followed. I did not construct the plan. And if all of that is justified at a level higher than I can understand, I can accept that. But at this point, I don't believe that stuff's necessary. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's totally okay if I am wrong, but I'm still going to speak this side because it doesn't seem like anyone else is, to be honest. As for attacking Iran, Donald Trump says that he wants the Iranian people to prosper and he would like to have good relations with countries all around the world. We've been told that Iran was trying to assassinate Donald Trump. That may have been true at some point. I don't believe it has been true in the last year. I think that we are getting a retelling of a story with Iran as the character, the evil character that is going to do all these terrible things to Donald Trump, when we know it is not actually true in the good twin, evil twin paradigm, where we can understand that it is the global regime looking to do bad things to Donald Trump and not any one country that can just be called by the name of its country. Oh, Iran is the evil country trying to kill Donald Trump. No, there is a global regime that may be trying to kill Donald Trump, but it is not all of Iran, and it is certainly not the Iranian people trying to do that. Donald Trump has said again and again that he wants good relations. Now, neocons don't want that to be true, and they don't want that to be true of Donald Trump. If you have an organization called Friends of Zion, it is probable that you would support the neoconservative, military expansionist view of the world in service of an Israeli ethno-state that is, a quote-unquote Jewish ethno-state, but the empowerment and enlargement of the global regime proxy state known as Israel. So the motivations seem clear. The motivations of Macgregor in communicating those motivations are somewhat unclear, but let's continue. What Trump will or will not do is unknown. When the elusive stillness in the standoff between Tehran and Jerusalem will end is also unknown. Macgregor just said that the paragliding go-kart incident seems fake on some level. We should then assume that he is understanding of the fact that what happens after the paragliding go-kart incident is also therefore fake on some level, even if it was only in the justification for the incidents. It turns out it's fake on many more levels beyond that. But Macgregor, understanding that the paragliding go-kart incident was fake on some level, necessarily implies that other parts have to be fake and that the justifications would thereby be fake. So to believe that there is a reality prime war between Tehran and Jerusalem is a little silly. We have also seen that the exchange of so-called attacks back and forth have been literally and publicly acknowledged as face-saving operations that intentionally missed the targets despite whatever damage we are communicated. And the same was true of Donald Trump. He communicated the same in various stories. And the story in particular that the mainstream media always highlights is the one they claim gave traumatic brain injuries to American soldiers that Donald Trump makes light of. And of course, they want to blame Donald Trump for that incident, saying there were still devastating American losses based on this attack that Donald Trump allowed to happen because it was intended specifically to miss the target in a face-saving exercise. He has illustrated this dynamic. This dynamic should now never be forgotten about when we see the exchange of hostilities between Israel and Iran in this instance, but we will see many times throughout the world in the future. We have to pay attention to the fact that this is only face-saving, and face-saving in an exchange started by an incident that is replete with fakery. One thing is certain: if America joins Israel in its war against Iran, the outcome will be a geopolitical showdown that could dramatically alter the world as we know it. Oh, are you saying that the maps might be changed? It is the storm of the 21st century, and for the moment, the American ship of state is sailing right into it. At a minimum, Trump should demand answers from his civilian and military advisors to four important questions. So, the storm of the 21st century would be initiated by America joining Israel in its war against Iran. Donald Trump avoided war throughout his first publicly recognized term. And to the extent that there is any war happening in the world right now, we are being misled about the cause and the execution of that war and our role in it. To the extent we have any role at all, and Donald Trump was involved with situations under a devolution scenario, it has to also be considered under the good twin, evil twin paradigm that there are parties that should be supported by MAGA, both in the territory called Ukraine and the territory called Israel, and eventually in the territory called Taiwan. And it is entirely possible that while the narrative is telling us our money and materiel is going to support these countries that we see as evil twin proxy states, to the extent that any resources are moving at all, they could be to support the good twin elements in those evil twin proxy states, and maybe even be some sort of, not reparations, but making whole of those good twin elements in those countries who have been victim to evil twin elements of the United States of America and the global regime, insofar as the regime and the US have been indistinguishable under every president other than Donald Trump, as that false reality layer and the illegitimate representatives and presidents are in control of that layer. So you got to keep these things in mind and be consistent with that good twin, evil twin paradigm, and look at it in all of these situations and understand the elements in our country and the elements that could be aligned in these other countries, even when these countries are by and large global regime proxy states. Okay, question number one. What is the American purpose in waging war against Iran? Is Washington's purpose to destroy the Iranian state, to destroy its capability to wage war against Israel, to eliminate Iran's developing nuclear capability, or to decapitate the Iranian state in the hope that the Iranian people will overthrow their national government? Well, I don't think we have to do any of those things, and I don't believe that Donald Trump thinks we have to do any of those things either. So there would be no purpose in waging war against Iran. Again, we can see the unreality of the war we are being told about right now, as their critical attacks on one another are face-saving operations that, to the extent anything is happening, are almost certainly waged by the individual country against evil twin elements in its own country to eliminate those elements. Will we see something like that happen here? Is it possible we have already seen things like that happen here that we have not known to be those things? All these goals demand serious study and analysis. In some cases, they overlap. In others, they do not. The answers require identifying resources, manpower, capabilities, and the time needed to achieve these goals. Is it obvious? It is obvious, that America's air and naval forces will have to deliver powerful disabling strikes through dense Iranian air and missile defenses, while potentially defending themselves and American military bases against attacks by Iranian and allied forces in the region. Macgregor is essentially saying that it's not even possible for us to fight this war, quote unquote, effectively. What does he mean by that? It means it won't happen. And these will be the reasons. He is prefacing all these reasons. He is seeding them narratively so that we understand, it is not an argument from weakness as portrayed by neocons when it is said that our attacks would not be successful on Iran. While the neocons are trying to sell the war, these arguments will be used to defeat the neocon arguments. And that is all good. And again, I have great respect for Colonel Macgregor. I will question everything, but I have thought he was a straight shooter operating on a delayed informational timeline and still think he's doing a good thing. I'm open to that being wrong. I don't like the fact that the informational timeline is being delayed noticeably. But, what are you going to do? This stuff's not all just to please me. And I understand that there's a higher purpose for it, potentially. I got to see that happen in reality and play out all the way before I just give over to the idea, oh, it's all a plan. This is the storm. Maybe it is, okay? And I want to be totally supportive of that. But because I don't know, and because of that fog of war, we have to try to operate on objective grounds and on principled grounds. And on those grounds, I'm saying I believe I can recognize an intentional delay in the informational timeline in the information being disseminated to the American public. Now, they might come back and argue, well, all that information is out there for anyone who is actually being diligent about finding this information, to which I would say that is a damn good argument. And again, that suggests that people need to be encouraged to move away from their commitment to the television characters and begin either doing the work themselves or following people who are doing the work and trying to advance that timeline, not only for themselves, as we at Badlands are doing, but for our audience. And I'm not saying that we're the only people in the world, although we kind of are. Not the world, I shouldn't say that. The United States in the media landscape, as I understand it, and I certainly spend a lot of time attempting to understand it. If you know other people like that, tell me about them. And I know that there are some individual creators, but it's not the Daily Weimar, and it's not the Blaze, and it's not Fox News. And it's not the people who are making $1 million a week to lie to millions of people at a time. Let's get back to the article. Question number 2. Oh, sorry. Based on these answers, let's finish question number 1. Did I go all the way through that? How long can these forces operate before their stocks of munitions are exhausted and their human and material losses are replaced? Again, an important question that suggests nothing like this will happen. Based on these answers, the stated objectives may or may not be attainable. National political and military leaders habitually plan and organize to achieve short, decisive outcomes, but wars always last longer than anticipated. And why is that? It's because wars are good for taking over countries and directing a lot of spending in certain places, and also systematically eliminating the patriotic people who do not want to be supporters of the global agenda. And that is true everywhere, not just here. How will the U.S. military power achieve the objectives? That is Macgregor's and Ramaswamy's question number 2. What is the right mix of weapon systems and munitions? What targets promise effects that profoundly shape Iran's ability to fight? In the aftermath of the Second World War, studies of bombing effectiveness reveal that the most important contribution air power made to Germany's defeat was the destruction of German fuel production and the transportation network to move it. Its second most important contribution was to cause German air forces to defend Germany's cities and industries, thus stripping the German army of its close air support. But thousands of tons of bombs were still dropped on thousands of targets with minimal impact on the German war machine. How strange. It's almost like we were lied to about a few things. Can air and missile power alone compel the Iranian state to submit to Israeli and American demands? To date, no amount of precision strike forces linked to space-based and terrestrial persistent intelligence surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities has delivered victory in war. The Kosovo air campaign inflicted enormous damage on the Serbian economy, but its impact on Serbian ground forces was minimal. Yet once Moscow withdrew its promise of energy and food support to the Serbian people, the destruction of power plants and civilian and commercial infrastructure did induce the Serbian leadership to remove its forces from Kosovo. Nevertheless, Serbian air defenses, despite their obsolete technology, were never degraded below 80% effectiveness. Isn't that crazy? Precision strike has advanced in lethality and capability, but so has the military technology of the Iranian state. How far is unknown. In addition, it may turn out that air and missile attacks may prove incapable of halting the launch of tens of thousands of missiles, rockets, and unmanned systems against Israel, as has been the case with Hezbollah. What is the desired end state? That is question 3. What does the president want Iran and the region that surrounds it to look like when the fighting ends? Well, Donald Trump has told us many times he wants the Iranian people and the Iranian nation to prosper, just in ways that are not threatening. This question is potentially the most difficult to answer. Unlike Iraq in 1991 and 2003, or Serbia in 99, or Libya in 2011, Iran is not isolated. Iran has allies and supporters. By failing to defend the end state in 1991, American operational strategic military planners were unprepared for the war's outcome. The resulting peace was unsatisfactory to the long-term interests of the United States. How about that? The Russian Foreign Ministry recently announced that negotiations on the strategic security partnership between Russia and Iran are ongoing, with a particular focus on military cooperation. China's President Xi Jinping has assured Iran of China's support in the defense of Iranian national sovereignty and security. Oh, wow. So Russia and China are supporting Iran, or would support Iran, in the event of some wider outbreak of war between the regime proxy state of Israel and Iran. And of course, the neocons and the global regime have been trying to create a war with Russia in Ukraine for the last nearly 3 years now. And they've been drumming up the premise for war with China for a number of reasons, but most especially a future conflict over Taiwan. So here we have an opportunity to engage in a full-on world war, because China and Russia would be on Iran's side in that situation. This is what Macgregor is describing. Even Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman advises against attacking Iran. During a recent summit of Arab and Muslim leaders, MBS stated the international community should oblige Israel to respect the sovereignty of the sisterly Islamic Republic of Iran and not to violate its lands. Through the good twin, evil twin dynamic, you have nations of the Sovereign Alliance aligning against the powers of the global regime. That is why the good twin, evil twin dynamic is the only sensible dynamic through which to view geopolitics. And talking about countries only as countries, as we have been coached to do by the television, we have been educated into retardation. That tells us to ignore these dynamics and just focus on the countries. Iran bad, Russia bad, China bad, Saudi Arabia bad. Doesn't matter if they're good or bad, or who is, or whether the people in charge of the nations and making decisions for the nations are good or bad. All that matters is that they are known to be bad nations. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are also making strategic financial moves. Saudi's holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds have fluctuated significantly, falling to approximately $108 billion as of July 2023, a decline of over 41% since early 2020. And I guess technically, if you're a numbers person, he said 108.1 billion. Who knows? Maybe that's comms, very specific. If a conflict with Iran breaks out, the Saudis and Emiratis will likely repatriate their wealth to the Arabian Peninsula and launch a fire sale of their U.S. treasuries, causing a financial crisis in the U.S. and the West on the scale of the Great Depression. Wow. So, cover stories for a future financial collapse and the future repatriation of U.S. dollars. We are unwinding the things that the global regime has done. And one of the things that has to be unwound is the supply of fiat dollars, the explosion in the supply of fiat dollars over the last however many years. I often tell people, this has kind of become one of the more popular things that I've kind of said. If you are 35 and I think now $36 trillion in debt to your enemy in a war, and you win the war, you're not $36 trillion in debt anymore. You don't win a war against an enemy and then give them what they say you owe them. That's never going to happen. So, these are all explanations for those things that must be done in an ideal scenario where we are unwinding everything on that false reality layer. And that has got to be the ultimate goal. The goal was never to just get Donald Trump recognized as president again. That is just, and again, I love Donald Trump, but that's not the goal. It's got to be so much bigger than that, because the problem is so much bigger than who's president. Who's president is a minor problem, especially when all the other presidents are just puppet characters, Manchurian candidates, executing an agenda that has nothing to do with the will and consent of the people of the United States. Less conspicuous, but no less important, is Turkey's decision to break relations with Israel. President Erdogan has also signaled that Turkish forces are ready to launch operations in northern Syria to destroy U.S. and Israeli-backed Kurdish forces that threaten Turkish and Syrian security. Turkish forces could easily be committed to the defense of Lebanon, or Egypt. So a NATO country is going to side against America and Israel, two of the critical NATO nations. And I mean, I know Israel's not technically, but they are a regime proxy state, and NATO just represents the powerful militaries of the regime proxy states. There's no reason to pretend that the technical details of various alliances are actually what's at play in reality prime, because they're not. What is the strategic cost to the American people if Washington declines to participate in a regional war begun by Israel? That's his question number 4. Since October 7th, 2023, Israelis' political and military goals have extended far beyond the defense of Israeli national territory. And again, that's what we were told Israel's 9/11, the paragliding go-kart incident of October 7th, justified. They had to defend their territory. They had to defend the Jewish nation and the Jewish people there. And if you don't support their indiscriminate killing of anyone forever, then you are anti-Semitic. That is what we were told for all of this time. Netanyahu seems confident that with American financial aid and military support, Israeli forces can remove millions of Palestinian Arabs from Gaza and the West Bank and Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. Nevertheless, to secure Israel's victory, Prime Minister Netanyahu insists that Iran and its proxies in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen must also be destroyed. Now, are Israeli forces removing millions of Palestinian Arabs from Gaza and the West Bank? Are they committing the genocide that we are told about by certain segments of our population? Now, I would 100% be on board with the claim that there has been a genocide in Palestine over decades. That wouldn't surprise me in the least for that to be 100% true and an accurate telling of what was done by quote unquote Israel over that time. It's also possible that what's happening now is the formation of the two-state solution, which seems to be coming into play pretty obviously, though it has not been admitted by regime media or Uniparty government. And it has not, I guess, I see Ghost in the chat. Maybe he can weigh in, but I don't believe that it has been admitted even by Donald Trump, although there may have been hints toward that. Nonetheless, there are other world leaders, especially in Saudi Arabia in particular, but in the Middle East, who recognize the existence of a Palestinian state. And I believe the UN even recognizes the existence of Palestine as a state, which would then suggest that there might be an operation to eliminate regime proxies within Palestine, the same as there's an operation to eliminate regime proxies potentially within Israel. There's certainly one to eliminate them in Ukraine. You can imagine, I'm pretty sure there's one to eliminate them in the United States, and we will see one in Taiwan as we saw one before in Hong Kong. And sometimes these require kinetic activity, sometimes they don't. There are systems of tunnels throughout all these regime proxy states where regime assets, forces, people may be fortified in fortified positions, and maybe some sort of kinetic action is required to eliminate and move that. And if that's what's happening, if state terrorist cells propped up by the global regime are being eliminated in these various countries around the world, then we can support that element, because that is the evil twin element being removed by force, totally justifiably, because of what those elements have wrought over the course of decades in all of these countries. Go says, correct, Chris, though through this narrative process, the international community has flipped and now supports a two-state solution. The idea that this genocide narrative is a story to change opinions is very plausible. It is working. Yeah, I mean, Ghost and I differ slightly in our interpretations, and I think that primarily we differ on our interpretation of the timing of some of these things. And, you know, he might be right. I might be right. It doesn't ultimately matter, because we are kind of pursuing the same truths in that situation. If we arrive at different conclusions right now, it's going to be one or the other of us, or maybe something else that proves to be the reality prime layer. We are doing the best we can to tell what that layer is, moving through that fog of war, operating with the interference of all these false reality layers. And what I care about is the truth coming out. I don't care about me being right, especially not in relation to one of my good friends in this cause. So it doesn't matter which one of us are right. And I'm happy that he still pursues his through line with what he sees as what's happening. And maybe we will eventually converge in our understanding. Hopefully that will be with the full emergence of what the actual truth is. But it's good that there are multiple interpretations so that we can assess things through different lenses. What do Netanyahu's goals mean for the health of the American economy and the stability of the international system? Can Israel survive without attacking its numerous enemies? Well, if a two-state solution has already been agreed to, and the Abraham Accords have been put in place so that relations with Israel are normalized, then we should be able to easily say that the two-state solution has clearly already been agreed to, and that it is being implemented in accordance with all these parties. And if Netanyahu is the guy that is doing that, whether out of his own good nature or whether he's being forced to by all the powers of the world, making this evil man somehow fall into line, whatever it is, the relevance is whether or not that's what's happening. Because if that's what's happening, then it's important for us to begin to interpret the events emerging in the narrative through that lens, understanding that underlying reality, the emergence of the two-state solution, and look at these statements with that understanding. The meaning is different of this sentence. What do Netanyahu's goals mean for the health of the American economy and the stability of the international system? Well, if his goals are to solidify that two-state solution as has been agreed to, not only in relations with Donald Trump and the United States of America, but in relations with the other powers of the Middle East and world powers, broadly speaking, well, then his goals actually work toward the health of the American economy and the stability of the international system as the multipolar world emerges from the perspective of the good twin. From the perspective of the evil twin that conflates the American economy with the global regime's fiat banking system and control over global economies, well, then that's destructive to that understanding, to the stability of the international system. The one world liberal international rules-based order is collapsing. So if you are a fan of that order, then Netanyahu's goals, even under the good twin rubric, the international system would be destroyed from that perspective. Now, that is what we want. So it's fine so long as the good twin is ultimately winning. And it seems like that's the case. Can they survive without attacking numerous enemies? Well, yeah, of course Israel can survive without attacking numerous enemies. In fact, that's exactly what the plan is designed to accomplish. So all of this is good. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower refused to risk war with the Soviet Union over Hungary's revolution against communism. How about that? In the same year, Eisenhower refused to support the Anglo-French-Israeli intervention to seize the Suez Canal. In 1968, President Lyndon Johnson refused to employ American military power to halt the Soviet military intervention, reasserting control of Czechoslovakia. None of these decisions harmed American national interests. And of course, this is an answer to the constant discussion about what they always refer to as appeasement. The neoconservatives want, quote unquote, nothing conservative about them, only global communists. They want to say at any time, look at World War II. Neville Chamberlain was appeasing Hitler, and that's why the war went on so long. Winston Churchill is the hero for really taking it to Hitler. It is always that explanation. And George Bush used the same one. We could see the mushroom cloud. We're going to fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. There's this great evil in the world. If we don't eliminate it, it is eventually going to reach us and then destroy us. So if we don't preemptively strike and destroy this nation or group or whatever, then we will be destroyed down the line. And that potential future is so devastating, even though we're making it up, that we have to create incredible destruction right now in reality. And that excuse has always been used. Macgregor is refuting that argument with these examples. Eisenhower viewed the success of American arms in the Second World War as a result of the carefully constructed grand strategy drawn by civilian leaders and executed by the senior leadership of the armed forces. Stanley Kubrick's 1964 film, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, not only lampooned the thinking prevalent in the 1960s about nuclear war, but demonstrated the breakdown of this important policymaking process. And that is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is absolutely hilarious and spot on in its political commentary. And I'm sorry, I just realized that I was not sharing my screen. How unfortunate. Let's get to the end of this article, and then we will say goodbye. The film, starring Peter Sellers and George C. Scott, begins with a rogue Air Force general who orders nuclear-armed B-52 bombers to attack targets inside the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the president, who says he does not want to go down in history as a mass murderer, suddenly discovers that the Soviets created a doomsday machine consisting of cobalt bombs set to strike the continental United States if the Soviet Union is attacked. So mutually assured destruction. Eventually, all the bombers are recalled except for one B-52 commanded by Major T.J. King Kong. Unaware of the recall order, King Kong completes his mission, yelling and waving his cowboy hat as he rides the bomb to his death. The outcome is nuclear Armageddon. Hardly the stuff of comedy, but it is a cautionary tale. Actually, it's hilarious. Any number of accidents or false flags could precipitate conflict in the Middle East, but Dr. Strangelove need not become a reality. In the words of the great coach Vince Lombardi, the measure of who we are is what we do with what we have. It is up to Trump to use American power wisely. And yes, Macgregor and Ramaswamy propose the neocon argument that we will see on the horizon. And I think that that article is intended to refute it while also supporting the notion of the sovereign alliance and telling us that when the United States does not come to the aid of our friend Israel in the story, even though Israel is under attack from those evil Iranians, we should rest assured that this is not only going to yield the best outcome for the good twin element in Israel and in Iran, but it will yield the best outcome for the good twin element of the United States of America, represented by American patriots, people in the truth community, the newly awakened, the redeemable communists, MAGA, and America first. And I think that is ultimately what we all want and what we are working toward Without the global regime in place, without its incentive and punishment structure, without its constant need to acquire more power to justify its own existence and create more chaos to justify the need for more power, the world would be a different place. That is the world we are working toward. Thank you all very much for hanging out on the live streams this week. We'll have a few more of them next week. And with that, I will say, I think I will be back on Monday. But again, next week and the week after, it's going to be a little inconsistent. And then at some point in the middle of December, we will go back to a more consistent sort of thing with some of the, privately recorded episodes. I get that people are liking this format. I like it as well. I probably won't always like it, but this is cool for now. I hope it's working for you. Thank you again for hanging out. Thank you, everyone, for the follows, the subscriptions, the Rumble rants, etc. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you next week. I will be back sometime next week at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never
let you down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.